Welcome, everyone. Today I'm with my co-host,
Konrad, Yerba Mate, Addict, Chihava, and my co-host.
Matt Laker, and today is the second episode of our podcast. Last week we talked about mental models, and I actually really enjoyed having this podcast with Konrad, and I hope Konrad enjoyed it likewise. And therefore, we are recording the next episode of the podcast. We had a lot of interesting talks, and I recommend you watching this on double speed. You can do that. Some people messaged me about this, and some people also commented about this. I think that they really enjoyed the episode and that they listened to it on double speed, so they would be actually able to watch the whole thing before falling asleep for their last hour before bed. And we're going to talk about not only mental models today, but also Konrad is reading this one book that I'm trying to get my hands on, and this book is called
The Ultimate Blueprint for Insanely Successful Business by none other than Keith J. Cunningham.
Right, the guy with my favorite last name. I really find this last name amusing, to be honest. But
What
anyway,
makes it
so
funny? What makes it funny?
it's because it contains word cunning and ham, and it's like the ham that is cunning, like a cunning ham that is cunning like a fox, and is like just like waiting there for you to attack your, I don't know, like it just sounds funny.
If I ever
Um,
interview him, I will let him know that this is something that stood out to us the most.
from his book.
Yes.
Anyway, so the book is hard to get. It's hard for me to get my hands on the book because this book is not on Amazon Audible. It's not on Scribd or whatever, however you pronounce it, Scribed as you call it. So can you make some quick brief intro before we get to mental models about who Keith Cunningham is?
Okay, so I guess that the first thing I would start with about him is that he has a second book that is more famous that some people might know, which is Road Less Stupid, which I would basically call a Bible of small business. Like if you want to run it, start it, or you already have one. And this one and that one is a lot broader and a lot also thicker, so it has a lot more pages and a lot more information. This one is a lot shorter, but it's also super actionable. It's just more kind of geared towards like finances specifically and profit and we and as far as Keith Cunningham, I think the best would be if I just read his bio from the book, because then we will not have a guesswork in my own words. I would just read like what are the facts. So Keith J. Cunningham, American entrepreneur, international speaker, and an acclaimed author, is regarded as one of the foremost authorities on business mastery, with more than 45 years of business and investing experience. Keith has taught critical business skills to thousands of top executives. He has created, in Keith's business school, he has created curriculum designed to accelerate your learning. And the ultimate blueprint for insanely successful business reveals Keith's core business principles, including why great operators get tired and how great business owners get rich. Keith is also the author of Keys to the Vault, Lessons from the Pros on Raising Money and Igniting Your Business. And he lives in Austin, Texas. But basically, in my own words and knowing him, I would say that he just is a guy, which that bio doesn't says, who, that's why I really believe and I know his stuff is real, is that he's a guy who's had dozens of businesses that he's vested in and he managed, and at some point, I think like 20 or so years ago, he lost everything, even though he was a millionaire, and he just lost everything by making stupid decisions. And then because he kind of reverse engineered how he got to this, and then he applied it again once he lost it, he was able to get back on top and become like a millionaire and manage, who is managing multiple businesses again, which in my opinion is usually kind of a really good proof that someone knows what he's talking about rather than luck.
Because they could get lucky once, right?
Yeah, because a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, there's quite a lot of people that get lucky because that's how capitalism works. Like on one hand it's skill, but also luck. That's the only way it can work. So seeing him that he's
why that's the only way it can work?
I think as far as I'm aware,
we talked about this, but I'm thinking that some people might question this now. Why the only way capitalism can work is because of luck? And I think you had great explanation the other day.
Well, I'm thinking if I have, I mean, my really simple one is that if we, like, that's the only way to really make sure that it's thriving to the maximum percent, because if you don't reward the people who get lucky, then the progress wouldn't be as fast, because, some people get there by luck, some people get there through like logic and skill, but in the end, it's all about just getting there, not how you got there. Because that's how like the machine, like the progress machine works. It's like, both. I don't know if it's the best explanation. I'm kind of lacking good words, but maybe you have better. But for me, that's kind of how I understand it. It's just like, if we punished luck, then the innovation wouldn't go as fast, and the machine wouldn't go as fast, because that's just, there's like two ways to get there. So then we would just kind of kill one side of it, and it just wouldn't work. But I don't know, I can't go more in depth into it because I guess I just don't understand it enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so can you give some briefing on this book, on the ultimate blueprint for successful business book? I'm really curious about what this book is actually about.
Well, I mean, like my thoughts would be that the best way to go about like kind of reviewing this book would be also through the lens of the other book which you really like, which is the E-Myth Revisited, because I would say E-Myth Revisited, or E-Myth, by Michael Gerber, I think,
right,
is kind of similar to what Keith preaches. I would say E-Myth is less actionable, but it has the same kind of core principles that I think the E-Myth says. Also, it talks a lot about like the operators, get tired, and most small businesses are started by really good operators, but then they are not good business owners. And
which in E-Myth they are called, I think, technicians.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, there are technicians here.
Just
are
for
operators.
Terminology there.
So yeah, like the big thing of this book, like the two phrases that are really stuck with me, which is like, yeah, great operators get tired, great business owners get rich, and then the trend is your friend. So he's basically the whole book is about what makes a business, like what's at the core of business when it comes to finances. Like, how does it all work? Like that there are, there are assets and there are, like he shows you how to look at like balance sheets, what's the most important, which is like cash flow, how to calculate in a business, like how to calculate all those, like when you get a financial statement from your accountant, that he's talking about. At first he outlines that like, big part of business owners, like small business owners, don't know how to look at the financial statements. So all they ever look is like how much profit or revenue you have at the end of the month, but that doesn't give you any optics. And because it doesn't give you any like kind of insights, it doesn't paint the whole picture. You have no way to really do anything about it. And I guess also one of the big phrases he says is that think of revenue and sales as offense. And that's his big thing in both of the books, that he's kind of
as
really
what? Think of revenue and sales as what?
As offense, like offense in business, or like in sports.
Like offense in sports.
Yeah, like in any sport you have offense and defense. So I would say that the big theme, the biggest theme in both Keith's books is the like kind of the emphasis on defense. And that's why I like it, because almost everywhere you read and listen or hear or YouTube or whatever content you consume now, everyone is talking about, the offense, which is like growth, more sales, more revenue, more customers, more employees, like everything more. But he is going almost at everything from the second angle, which is like, how can you build a world-class defense? And I would say it's especially important now that we just had like a quite a big crisis recently, which is still kind of prevailing. And in times like this is what's really important, because that's when most small businesses die. And his kind of big thing is that the reason is because they never took care of their defense, which is business optics, and measuring is defense for him.
And so what is business optics?
So business optics are basically all the like balance sheets, income statements, revenue, assets, like everything that's it could be measured. I'm looking at through all my notes. Yeah, cash flow statements, income statements, and then being able to analyze the data. So for example, using some various techniques he has, like dividing some things and applying percentages to it, so that you don't look at just the raw number, but you look at it in a way that's like more more descriptive, in a sense, like you are able to make conclusions out of it. I don't know if that makes sense.
And then those 3 points that you talked about, so the third one was trend is your friend, and what were the other two?
You mean like the sayings?
No, you at the beginning you said that there are 3 key things that the book is about, and you said the third one is that trend is your friend, and then you mentioned two other ones.
Well, I guess I said that trend is your friend is like the big thing he says, because trend is your friend. He refers to the fact that the way you make use of all the data in your business, or the like financial statements, is you have to look at the trend. Like you don't look at it as just like, what are the statements for this month, because it doesn't give you any insights. What gives you insights is when you look at it over time. How is it compared to last month? How is it compared to last 3 months? How is it compared to the same time last year? How is it compared to, has it changed in the past year? So that's basically what he's talking about when it comes to trend. And it makes a lot of sense, like when you think about math, statistics, and kind of business, like the way it makes sense to compare data is when you have something to compare it to, and you just look at it, doesn't mean anything. And yeah, the second saying was, great operators get tired, great business owners get rich. But I think what I would say is that the second big thing that I, now kind of read, because I haven't finished the book, but I'm like in more than halfway through, is that he's big on, for example, that you have 2 paths, for example, for growing your profit. You have the same 2 businesses, and you can either, for example, he gives the example, you can either take strategy A, which is, let's say, grow your sales by 25%, and it's gonna, let's say, increase your profits by whatever 10%, or you can reduce your expenses by like 10%, and that's gonna also do. So he for example gave really good example of 2 identical businesses, and with the goal of, hey, I want to increase my profits by, I don't know, 30%. And that business, the strategy A would be to just increase, go for more revenue and then more profit as such. And the other one would be to reduce expenses. And his big theme, and that's just across 2 books, is that the lot wiser approach is to go to the route B than A. A is where most people go. The problem with that route is that it's a lot harder and more unpredictable to try to increase revenue. In most businesses, to increase revenue by like 25% is a really huge task. It involves a lot of effort. He was giving like a lot of examples of like posting 5 times a day on Twitter, on LinkedIn, do this, marketing, increasing your marketing, doing all that just increase that. On the other hand, he says, that would also take a lot of time, probably like a few months at least, if not half a year. And he said that in his experience, in 9 out of 10 businesses, he's able to reduce the expenses in by like 10% in 60 days, which equals basically doubling the profit in most businesses. And he's a lot on like, don't buy those fancy chairs, don't buy stuff that you don't need for business, and don't call it that this is just a cost of doing business, because it's not. And that, fancy cars and all that stuff doesn't make you rich. Well, I guess you can give some more on your thoughts on like, because I think you have a lot to say in that matter. Maybe we can point the direction in something specific, but I think you have a lot to say because you are basically teaching people how to start business. You've been running different businesses for quite a long time, and you started them from scratch, and then again, like you converted in something like you created machines. So I think it would be, and you're also a fan of like E-Myth, so it'd be interesting to for sure hear about your thoughts on the matter of for sure measuring would be a big thing, like optics, why for example measuring KPIs, critical drivers, things like that are important. And why maybe, and start the conversation like why you think it's true, if you think it's true, that technicians or operators, great technicians, operators get tired, and great business owners get rich.
Okay, so I don't understand yet this book, but from E-Myth, we can learn that the business needs to be a system that works like a machine, and it needs to work as good, and the processes needs to be as properly deployed and organized as if you were to copy paste your company as a franchise, so that you could just get people and train them, show them exactly how to replicate every single process in your company through your SOPs, which stand for standardized operating procedures, manuals, through materials explaining them how to do things. And basically this allows you to create a predictable system where every customer is treated in the same way. Not that one time you come to a restaurant, and so this is my personal story. I went to a restaurant, and I really love burgers, and it's the first time that anybody ever served me something like this. It was this brioche bun of a burger that was purple. The color was purple. And it's just, purple bun. It's probably not as, it's probably like some, some way of chemically coloring it or whatever, obviously. But I was somehow amazed. Like the aesthetics of the whole meal were really amazing, and I was like, wow, awesome colors. This bun was just so delicious. It was crunchy on the outside, soft and buttery in the inside, so it was absolutely insane. And the next day I came over again to this restaurant, and they served me burger on a regular bun, and and I made a whole big drama about this. And it wasn't a drama. I just told them that I was expecting a purple bun, which, when I think about this in a retrospection, I think it's kind of weird that a 27-year-old dude who runs a business comes into a restaurant and he's, not accepting that they gave him wrong color of a bun because he wants a purple one, But then I thought about this in a different way. As a customer, you have a certain expectation that the company, you have certain expectation towards the business that you work with. And the company makes an implied promise anytime that they serve you, that the next time they will serve the same thing. They don't tell you that they will serve you the same thing, but if you go to McDonald's and buy a cheeseburger anywhere in the world, there is an implied promise that this is going to be the exact same cheeseburger. So if you go to some, let's say, other country with some foreign cuisine that you particularly don't enjoy, and you go to McDonald's, you know you're going to have your beef burger with cheese, and you know what it's going to taste like. And it's not going to be really good burger, but it's going to be always the same. It's not going to be the healthiest burger, but it's going to be always the same. So this implied promise, and McDonald's being able to stand up to this promise is amazing. And this is the trust that brand can develop. And in the same way, we can't create companies that treat customers in a different way. You know, one time you come to a hairdresser and they offer you a coffee, and there was a story from Emeth, and then the other day the guy comes and he offers him a wine or something like that. So he was making this whole story about that. I mean, it's fine. Like, I got something better than a coffee. I mean, wine is always better than coffee, but
depends who you ask.
But it wasn't what I expected. It was kind of, the bad taste after this experience, because they just treat customers by random. Like, the owner has a good mood and he offers wine. The other day, the owner doesn't have a good mood and offers something else. So business is art, but it's art of making a replicable machine. It's not art of treating your customers in a different way every time, depends on your mood, because this destroys the trust. And really, we need to fight for the trust to get it from our customers. Same way most of the businesses actually work. They work because of the trust. So if there was no trust, you would not get into a cab with a taxi driver, because you wouldn't trust them that they're not gonna kill themselves and yourself. If there wasn't trust involved, you wouldn't go to a restaurant, because you would not trust them that they're not gonna poison you. So this mutual trust between people is necessary, and it's a massive factor. And you can really increase the trust when you are capable of living up to the expectation of implied promises that are not even always specific. So this can be done by creating processes and checklists and workflows and SOPs. So every time your customers are getting the exact same results, every time the process is the same. Another advantage of following this idea of creating a process, which is a big part about Emeth's book, but also my personal experience and also what we teach, is that once you have a process that is replicable and perfected, and people in your company are repeating this process, and then something doesn't work, you can backwards engineer why something doesn't work, because most of the time something changed in the process. Or if you want to improve something, for example, you specifically want to improve your closing rate between, let's say, on a sales call, for example. So every sales call should go with the same or similar script. With the same script, obviously there is some personal touch to it, but needs to go with the same set of things that you say, the same qualifications and so on. And then you add a new thing. So the customer tells you at the end of a call, hey, I don't want to buy this because I am going to be busy for the next 2 months because I'm actually going on massive holidays. And that's why we have added to our process to ask people whether they have big holidays coming up. And that's what we deployed in every company that I consult or I'm involved in. And this helps massively, but we wouldn't know that if every person that works on this process had a random process that we wouldn't know what actually changed and improved it. So actually making the process always the same and then changing one thing in the process allows you to test whether this change is actually improving something in the business or not. So that's the second advantage. So you get more trust from customers. That was advantage number one. Advantage number two is you can improve things so that they work. And then finally, advantage number three, you can actually multiply yourself easier, because you can't just multiply. You think you can multiply your business and hire people, you can't. You think you do, you cannot. If you cannot explain it, if you cannot processize it, and if somebody cannot be trained to replicate you, then you cannot replicate yourself. So this is why it's so important, also in line with E-Myth book, to be able to train people easily through those processes so that your company can actually grow by literally copy pasting the things that already work in the company. So this is about E-Myth. Now coming back to your question, how does it refer to this book? I have no clue.
I can tell you. I have a good I have a good segue now to this, because I think based on what you just said, and I think it was really important how you explained E-Myth, is the way I now see the connection there between those two books, is that what's outlined in the E-Myth and what you just explained is the first brick. Like these are the first bricks that you have to, kind of develop those processes and SOPs so things are consistent. And then you outlined what are the kind of advantages of it being consistent. And then I would say the big one you kind of haven't said, and that's the segue to this book, is that if you have a consistent process that someone follows, then you can measure it. And what it's the famous saying is that what gets measured gets improved. And then you could, for example, say, I think Keith also has a really good quote that anyone who doesn't measure doesn't want to be held accountable. And I think that's very true. And then that's, I guess we could segue here. Like you could now say,
really love this quote.
So maybe you could say what makes measuring so important, because I think you are a big fan of also like measuring things and keeping track, and that's, I think, very much connects to what you said before, right?
Okay, I love measuring. I hate being measured. But I know that measuring performance helps people, and anybody that we consult in the tribe who is actually measuring everything that they do, just through the simple process of measuring what they are doing, they tend to have better results, because they are just conscious. They're more conscious of what is happening. So people tend to imagine that they are doing well or that they are doing badly. Maybe they didn't close a sale and they suddenly start feeling bad, and they didn't sleep well and they suddenly start feeling like everything is shitty. But then you look at the trends of how their company's going, and actually they calculate everything, and then they're like, okay, I just hired one more employee, so my expenses are higher, therefore I made less profit this month. However, there is a positive trend. There has been some investment done in a company to improve it. So really, they gain more consciousness when they just make those self-assessments for what actually is happening and they are doing. So people who are not measuring, and they say, let's say even with businesses like sending proposals on Upwork, they're gonna say something like, oh yeah, I'm sending quite a lot of proposals. But then you ask people, okay, how many have you sent in the last week? They're like, yeah, about 50 or something. They're like, all right, specifically, how many did you send on Monday? So basically, the more precisely you measure, even if you don't ask them, but even if they ask themselves, they get this consciousness that gets them closer to the reality, because like you said, what gets measured gets done. I think the large part of this is that they are just conscious, and they are just ashamed of themselves, that that, well, I'm not doing anything, or they think that they're doing badly, but then they get this consciousness about the reality of what is happening in their life or business, and then they're like, all right, I'm doing well. So that's the thing number one. Then keeping people accountable, and checking with them. I mean, that's just another thing, because when people measure you, you feel discomfort that
Mm.
you're getting checked and measured, and it's unpleasant. But like I said before, most of the times when you grow, you are supposed to feel unpleasant. You're supposed to feel pain. It's not supposed to feel good. So not having someone who keeps you accountable, I think it's a big mistake. I do have people who keep me accountable, and I think I would not do as well without it, because I literally feel um, ashamed to talk to people in my business circle. That's, well, like this week I did nothing, or the revenue didn't grow. So I think there is this social pressure. There is this shame playing the role in accountability. There is this consciousness, and obviously another one is, I mean, we took this to the whole new level with accountability uh, in the tribe, with comparing revenue of people and getting them to compete against each other, which particularly taps on certain personality styles and their need to compete, particularly um, the aggressive, self-confident personalities,
Mm.
self-confident mostly, so, or consciousness. So this is very interesting as well, because this will work with certain personalities better. But now, what was the actual question, Konrad? Because I think I started talking about accountability, but I think
No,
I
the question is like what makes measuring so important, and I guess like you kind of answered it, and for me, I can give my personal story that for me it's interesting because I feel like some people, some personality styles, which like you like personality styles, have
a
more
lot.
tendency to kind of liking it and keeping track of things and building spreadsheet and all that, and some I kind of the opposite of that. I feel like I'm kind of the opposite of that, so my tendency is to not do those things and keep kind of things like more vague. And business was like this very much kind of a really hard knock to the face when I realized that a lot about success in business is about like specificity and measuring, which are like very two things that I wasn't that, maybe not that I wasn't a fan of, but I was just not really, it didn't come to me naturally. It was like more vague and like to talk. But in business is such a really hard, I know, kind of encounter with reality, because like it's very, like you say, like if something works, it means it's like it works. Like if you get sale, if you have money on your account, it's real, like someone paid you for that. So like the whole process must have worked. If it hasn't worked, it means that there's something wrong. So you can't like make furies about like, oh, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Like if you don't get cash, that it means maybe some part of it works but the whole chain doesn't. And the same thing about sales call and each of those. And the only way you can kind of look at it without any bias is if you like kind of track and measure it properly, because then you don't have this like kind of just you don't rely on your like memory and on your own human
Perception,
biases,
right? As
perception
we
and
talked
biases.
last week, right? Because we don't see the reality, because we look through the lens of whatever mood, emotion, whatever. It's just not a mental model, right?
Yeah, like
So
even the
so that
most
was our definition of a mental model, right? Like, because we can't see the reality, we just see through our perception, which is skewed, right?
yeah, like that we are not you know we can be logical, but we are usually not. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
how I would say, like, we have the ability to be logical, but it's not, most people have the tendency to be the opposite of logical. And being logical, it's not necessary, I would say, like, that it's better than being illogical. It's just like, for example, in business, there is a lot of place to be logical and to measure things, and it's really important. There's also some space, like, for example, in marketing of your business, there is some space for irrationality and trying out things that don't make sense. But a big part of this business, I would say, even bigger one, and I think that's a bit different than some other areas of life, really is about that. But then if we look at those things, because we wanted to talk about a little bit of mental models, and with Victor, we talked about this, is that the way you kind of learn mental models is that you kind of learn them and you just start seeing them in different, things. You start seeing them in different areas, in different cases, in different things. So for example, the same thing I would say applies when we're talking about measuring in business. The same thing applies to like workouts in gym, right? Like the only way you improve your lifts, the only way you get stronger, like really, like
Is you increase every time, right? You
yeah, you
measure and
increase and you
increase.
keep track of the workout, so you know what happened, what was the last time was the weight, how many sets you did, how many reps you did, what what the weight should be this time. Like you can keep it vague, but and it might, you might improve slowly, but it's not gonna take you, the path is not gonna be as easy and kind of
And I
straight.
had the same experience with walking. So when we were in Moine, I started working on my weight and losing weight, and I started walking. And there was a time when I started walking a little bit, then I scheduled myself for 5 kilometers a day. Now I'm at 5 or 10, depends on the day. But I would never achieve this without measuring specifically exactly how many kilometers I walked. I use Apple Watch for this, which is the only useful function of Apple Watch, being honest, but a very useful one.
Besides the
Actually,
status symbol.
I particularly think that this is the opposite of like high status. It's quite the opposite. I feel these days, but I wear it when I walk, and I think it's just measuring very well, and I know, okay, that was 5 kilometers, and otherwise I never walk 5 kilometers if I don't measure it. I'm sure measuring works. When I measure, when I take the checklist of the checklist of things I need to do every day, like there is a checklist. I don't have physical checklist. I probably should. It probably would improve it.
Mm.
But I have a mental checklist of the things I need to do every day, which is 5 kilometer walk, which is well, there are a couple of things, so I can get to it a little bit later. But making sure that I have this checklist in my mind makes me really sure that this is done. And then there is this other thing about the social pressure of accountability, because my wife got into walking a lot, and whenever I don't walk, she would keep me accountable, and she would be like, hey, you didn't walk 5 kilometers, you're fat, I'm not going to sleep with you. And I try to do the same when she doesn't do it. And then when there are more people in the who are trying to keep each other accountable, I think this works even better. So yeah, this definitely applies to sports and really everything. But I did cut you off, Konrad. So you were talking about something that I pivoted towards. You were talking about gym and increasing weight every time. But there's one thing I wanted to ask you, because you said business is so numeric and so specific, and it's so about specificity. But what about this book that you talked about on the last podcast episode about the alchemy of business, that most breakthroughs were created through not logic, but somehow, through some feelings? Was it you talking about this?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was not about business. It's a book of it's called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. So he's the chairman of Ogilvy. So he's just like mostly a marketing guy, but I think he works in something called now like creative agency.
Mhm.
So basically, I mean, his whole idea is that, and that's why it's never so, like black and white. And we talked about it with Victor yesterday that, yeah, like having mental models and being super logical, yes, it's good. And he calls it logos, so from like Greek, the logos, so that's like the
Log-
logic. And then they
Logic.
have the mythos, I think, and it's always goes in pairs. So when it comes to Rory, he basically talks a lot about um, the fact that you just have to, like, there was something called like alchemists in the past, and they would just like mix around and play with different, like substances and things, and a lot of times there would be nothing, but sometimes it would be something, something would come out of this,
That
and
explodes on your face and
yeah, like it would explode, and you wouldn't, and most of the time you wouldn't even know like why the things happen, because they didn't have like the, the chemistry we have now, the understanding of
Mhm.
chemistry and bonds, but they had the end result. So in a sense they didn't have to understand how it got there. And that's how it is with many things, because if we understand that, we slowly discover things, but there is so many things that we don't know how to do, or there's a lot of things that somehow work, or we have them but we don't really understand fully how they work. And that's how a lot of like discoveries, like huge breakthroughs, were made. Like it just kind of, someone stumbled upon them, and then it took them like the next 20 years to kind of try to understand and break it down, like how specifically it works. So that's like one hand on what he says. And on the other hand, and that applies also to business very well, is that you can improve things objectively, and that's where most people focus on right now. And it's a big fallacy, because everyone wants to be super logical. We also talked about it with Victor. Everyone like wants, like, we are in the age of logic now. Like everything has to be like fact reality. There's no place for anything else. But the truth is, as much as you can improve things but like objective reality, you can also improve them psychologically, because we are not machines, and we interpret things like we talked about. We have perception. So a lot of times, and that's his big like kind of agenda now, is that there are a lot of problems that you can solve now psychologically, rather than like fact reality, and they make as much difference, or sometimes more, than the kind of the logical way. And he gives a lot of examples of how you can, for example, you want to improve the journey from like Manchester to London by train. So logically, what you would want to do, and what everyone tries to do, is want to shorten the duration of the train. So you try to create a faster train, better train tracks. The problem is that we are at such a point in evolution that it's really hard for us to push that barrier. But what you could do, instead of trying to shorten the duration, you could just make the journey more pleasant. And to our brains, it wouldn't be any different. Like you would say, you could spend like 1/100th of the money that you would spend on improving the trains by like 10 kilometers per hour, on just serving people free champagne on the train. And people would fucking love the train ride, and they would be like, oh, instead of 3 hours, I want 6 hours, So, and it's
Right.
just like one of many examples he gives of how you can, and it mostly applies usually in business, in marketing, but not only, but in general, it's worth to keep in mind that, yeah, like why we are talking about like logical measures, it's not the end or be all, right? And yeah, and that's how a lot of, also, I guess the good example would be a lot of those like things that blew up, like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. They're kind of more like psychological inventions, and they were also not discovered like, there was a lot of luck involved. Like they just stumbled upon something in our psychology that just triggers us to like really crave this and really get addicted to it. But we don't really have, still, like, now we are getting some explanation why it happens. But at first there wasn't one. Like it was just like, oh, it blew up. Like Instagram got like I don't know, like a couple million users in like I think a month or so. And it doesn't seem to be like so logical, right? Like it was kind of a psychological finding disguised in you know.
But
That
is
makes sense.
is it because so many people are trying to create or build something, and statistically, even though they are doing random things, statistically, 1 out of 1 million just works and explodes, and then we're gonna be like, hey, this works, and we're gonna back logic, the reasoning behind why it works, and I would say that's what happened after Facebook. A lot of apps started, understanding the concept of notifications and positive feedback loop, and getting you addicted to it, and they kind of followed it. But initially it was just a luck, and one of the millions of ideas around the world, and particularly good circumstances. But yeah, so that would be, you think, because just so many people are trying something, or it's not necessarily because of the data. So wouldn't you increase chances of making something successful by being purely logical? Because obviously they didn't, or I don't know, maybe they did, but I'm assuming they did not think of, let's say, Facebook of something that, like, I'm gonna backwards engineer psychology and gonna get all the people addicted to feeling of connection with people through notifications, right? That probably was not initial.
I think they had an idea, and then it worked in some form, and then they started figuring out why it works. The same happened. Like I listened to an interview with the Instagram guy who was the founder. Like at first their idea was there was like an app, like a check-in app, that you're at a restaurant and you post a photo from there, and they had very small amount of, they had investors, but it never really got big. The name was like Burn something, like the app was called. And then what they did was they asked the people that were using it, the small amount, like 100 users, like why they were using it, and they told them that they only use it for the aspect of sharing photos. They don't care about the check-in. So they decided to pivot and just make what is now an Instagram, just the purely photo sharing aspect of it. And I think with Facebook, it goes kind of like it clicked in some form, and then they kind of slowly started uncovering like what makes the thing click, and then they started like doubling down on the things that make it work. But I think back to your question about like if it's just about like a lot of people being logical and they finally by chance they discover it. I think I agree more with the statement. I think Rory also has it, that if something was to be solved logically, we would already have solved it. A problem now in the world, because we have such an advanced, insights into like, the logical ways, and so many people working on things, that most of the, like not all, but most big part of the big kind of problems of the world, or things that we are looking for better solutions to, can only be solved through some form of irrationality, because in illogic, because like if it was to be solved logically, we would have already done it. And I think that's where I would be on this kind of argument of like, yeah, you can improve things there, but there's like two types of improvements, right? Like there's the improvement that is like very linear, so like, okay, I can improve it by 5%. But if you're talking like the breakthroughs that are like significant improvements, like, hey, we had horses and then we had cars, then these usually happen through the way of kind of like alchemy, just like playing around with things. Like Uber, I think he gives really example of Uber. Like it was also like totally random stuff. Like guy just watched like Mission Impossible and was like, oh, it would be cool if we made an app out of that for taxis. And in the end, what happens now is that the reason that got so successful is purely psychological, almost like why Uber is so successful. And he explains very well that it's the fact that one is that you can see the path, so you don't have to like get stressed when you see at home and you don't know when the taxi is gonna come for you. You can time your leave, you know how much it's gonna cost. Like there's a lot of like aspects that are purely
Friction taken.
psychological, not logical in the sense that, hey, it's cheaper, or hey, it takes less time. Actually, a lot of it is about the stuff that is not like obvious to our minds, like why it works so much. And it was a bit of a
really, really interesting. Okay, so do you have anything else to add in regards to the book that is interesting before we get to mental models?
I guess one really good, because Keith is really a master of metaphors and like really making complex things simple. I really respect those type of people because it means they have a really big understanding of things. He said like measuring time and thinking time are two highest forms of leverage. And I absolutely agree with that, because you probably know it also from E-Myth. Like leverage is like the biggest key to business. Like it's all about like, yeah, you have to have a good functioning business, but it's all about like how much leverage you can apply. It's like a lot better to have like, you know, 1 million revenue with like, you know, 5 employees than 2 million with 50 employees. It means like you apply the leverage a lot better, right? And in his opinion, like measuring time, so like the, you know, what you do with when it comes to measuring and thinking time, which is mostly covered in his second book, which is basically like sitting down and asking yourself a question. But usually it only you are able to do it if you before measure, because then you have stuff to like ask about usually, right? Like what can I do to improve the profits by 10% while keeping the expenses at the same time? Like you can only ask that question if you have the optics. So I would say this is big key. I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, I think it's really interesting, and I like the idea about those two highest, purest forms of spending your time, the thinking time and measuring time. Now, do you have any mental models that caught your attention that you would want to start with today?
Well, let me think. Well, there is a mental model of leverage, I guess. We could talk about that. Let's talk about leverage. Let me just find it. Okay, I have it. So let's give the definition according to Farnham Street. Most of the engineering marvels of the world were accomplished with applied leverage, as famously stated by Archimedes. Give me a lever long enough and I shall move the world. With a small amount of input force, we can make a great output force through leverage. Understanding where we can apply this model to a human world can be a source of great success. And that's, I think, in my opinion, that's like the biggest the biggest factor of success of biggest success factor of most of the most successful businesses right now. Like they are able to apply the biggest leverage, like all those huge multi-billion businesses that operate on like very few employees, like I don't know, maybe like Netflix or like Facebook and all the other ones. Like they just insane amount of leverage, right?
So what's the leverage there? Is it scalability? And because you don't really need to produce that much more, or like work so much more on it with like another 1,000 more customers? Is this the leverage in an example of Netflix? So think about it. If Netflix gets 1 million extra users tomorrow, it's not that much is going to change for Netflix in terms of internal operations. If I'm going to get 1 million customers tomorrow, there is going to be a massive change of how I can serve them. That's just impossible for me to incorporate that. So that's the leverage, right? This ability to scale.
Yeah, like like exactly, like scalability. Like because of great leverage, you have a really great potential to scalability, and that scalability now is the name of the game, because like if your business is very scalable, it has the most like potential, like room for growth in a sense, right?
Do you have any other ideas of what potential business leverages could be out there except scalability? I mean, there must be a list of those online as well, just like for mental models, like potential leverages. It must be like a list of like 10 or 20 different leverages that you can just apply in your business, right? It sounds like something worth researching and putting our thoughts into, maybe on another podcast as well.
Yeah, I mean, like the way you could think of leverage is like, if you just break it down, because it's like a very basic principle. So it's basically just something that where you input a certain force or energy, and then the output is much greater. So that's basically anything. Like, you could think of a lot of ways of marketing that give you, for example, a great leverage, because for the uh, resources needed, it gives you more. Like, I don't know, Facebook ads. Like if you spend $500 but get $10,000, it's leverage, right? Like in a sense, like you could look at it as leverage too. If you
Right.
look at email, like email doesn't cost anything, but produces, I don't know, it can produce like, I don't know, $2,000 for some marketing campaign or something. So it's a leverage. Like YouTube, you have, I don't know, 10,000 subscribers. I would call it a leverage. Like my friend has now like close to 100,000. It's a form of leverage, because even though maybe you don't directly maybe profit from that, like just if you, for example, are not running the YouTube ads or whatever, but this is like a form of leverage that you can use to, I don't know, get in the door with someone, get new relationships, get business opportunities like my friend is getting just randomly, because he has this leverage where through this like platform, he's now reaching like, hundreds of thousands and millions of people, and he's just doing it solo. So he has a huge leverage, right? And so, I mean, you could just go on and on and on, I think, with those examples of like leverage. No?
Yeah, that's very, 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 very interesting. Okay, so let's look at the next mental model today. I don't have them right here in front of me, so let's look at your notes. So I will let you pick mental models today.
Okay, I think this one is the one you will have a lot to talk about. I think it's called incentives.
Reciprocity.
No, reciprocity is different. Reciprocity is when like you do something, someone feels like he needs to do back. Like incentives is like, basically the definition here is all creatures respond to incentives to keep themselves alive. This is basic insight of biology. Constant incentive will tend to cause a biological entity to have constant behavior to an extent. Humans are included, and particularly great examples of incentive-driven nature of biology. However, humans are complicated in their incentives can be hidden or intangible. The rule of life is to repeat what works and what has been rewarded. But you can, I mean, incentives are, I think, the way you could kind of look at them and I think go more in depth into them yourself is through the lens of business. How incentives are really, a big key of having great employees who work well. I guess that's where my mind is at, but maybe you have some other good like examples.
So the incentive could be something as, let's say, all right, hey, can you increase my salary? And then you're like, all right, at the end of next month, when we make a monthly review, we're gonna talk about this. So you incentivize them to work better for the month until that meeting, right? Would that be an incentive? Is it as an example of this?
Yeah, but I think but that one is like very, like, I would say basic, but there's like more like subtle ones, which I think are usually like the key, and they are hard, I think, to figure out. But I think figuring out, I think in one of the books, I don't know if in E-Myth or maybe it was a different book, but there was also a lot about the incentives. Oh, I think yeah, because I think there is like a second mental model which is very much connected to that, which is called, give me a sec. And I think if you look at it through the lens of the second algorithms, compounding, what was it called? No. C's in the middle. Oh, there's bias from incentives.
So what is bias from incentives?
Well, bias from incentive is highly responsive to incentives. Humans have perhaps the most varied and hardest to understand set of incentives in the animal kingdom. This causes us to distort our thinking when it is in our own interest to do so. A wonderful example is a salesman truly believing that his products will improve the lives of the users. It's not merely convenient that he sells the product. The fact of his selling the product causes a very real bias in his own thinking. So that's like our...
Okay, so incentive for him is to sell it because he makes money. So he has bias in thinking that this thing is really good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
But then when you talk about incentives, then what kind of other incentives are we talking about in this model? So is it incentives such as, all right, I'm gonna get more power, I'm gonna get more whatever in life, or what kind of incentives are we talking about? Like what kind of incentives are we talking about in this model?
Yeah, I was trying to find, I don't know when is it, but there was this kind of thing called, but maybe it was not a mental model, but there was this kind of, not a fallacy, but by the way, I think that's the best way to look at incentive is that, and that's how this was a breakthrough for me, is that when you look at it, that you as a business owner and an employee, right? So you as a business owner, your kind of incentive is to maximize your profits, right? So in a sense, your incentive is to pay your employees the least for them doing the most work, while your employees is kind of the opposite. That's what they want. They want to work the least and earn the most. So the key with getting the incentives right, and I don't remember, it was called like this. There's like this, the relationship between the employer-employee. There is a name for that. That there's this fallacy that one wants this thing and the one wants the opposite. So when you think about incentives, where how they could, become helpful for you, it's like, how can you think of a way you design where the employees, incentives align with yours? So somehow rewarding in some form. It doesn't have to be money wise, it could be somehow psychological or whatever, or structuring his bonuses or around in such a way that he will want to do something that will benefit your business. You know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly what you mean.
For example, giving him commission on sales. You know what I mean?
And I was reading about this in Charlie's Munger book that we talked about last week. Poor Charlie's Almanac. He talked about this as well, that people always gonna follow the system that you create, but they're gonna follow the system to always get the best things for themselves. So the way to benefit the company is to set incentives in a way that people need to basically get the best things for themselves by getting the best things for the company. So this is how you should build systems.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not easy. That's the thing. Like, it's we are talking about it, but it's like most people are not able to figure out, like, unless there's some pattern. Like, for example, I recently realized that the whole industry of gastronomy, so like the people like waiters, like waiters, it's weird, but everyone's replicating a system because it was someone created a very good system where like the waiters get very low wage, but then they get the tips. from people. And if you think about it, it's like just someone had to have invented that, because it's not everywhere applied this way, but in restaurants and in bars, it's everywhere. It's not like one doesn't have it, everyone has it.
Right.
Because I think it's just a really good way of applying the incentives, where it's like, if maybe you wouldn't be this way, everything would be shit. Like, like the waiters would not give a shit, and the businesses, like the restaurants, would go bankrupt. Like, I don't know, but I feel like this is also like a good structure of how the incentives are aligned in some way, at least. That
I think what you say makes sense, that more and more restaurants needed to apply this, because they wouldn't survive, and therefore just going with the psychology of, or like, sorry, with the idea train of thought of evolution, would be that, all right, most of the restaurants just have tips and incentivized employees, because, well, those are the most of the restaurants that actually exist. So
it makes
I
sense,
would say,
right?
this makes sense. Yeah.
Because like they are incentivized to be good, because they get like tips, like to be nice, to serve well. And your benefit as a business owner or a restaurant is that people will come back, which is the whole point.
Right.
Like, you want to get more, or they will recommend you. So like, because the stuff was nice. So I think just somehow someone once, I don't know when, stumbled upon it, and no one has figured out a better system. And I think it's just a really good example of like, where the incentives are aligned in both ways. And it's not ideal still, because it's not like you always get the best customer service, but it's a good example, I think, right?
I worked very well when I was a waiter in a restaurant, until they implemented the system of shared tips. And basically the way it works is that, all right, when you get a tip, there is a box, and we share it with all the team members and with the kitchen. And then I thought, well, screw that, I'm not going to work like way harder than everyone else. And I felt really unfair, because at the time I believed that the fact that I'm getting the highest tips, or really high tips, was because of my personality. And I just believe that that's because, not because of the food that people get, but that's because how awesome I make them feel when they are in a restaurant. I think incentives work better when they are less collective and more personal. That's just one more idea that comes to my head when we were talking about this, when you think of creating incentives for your business.
No, that's very well could be the case. But one thing I wanted to connect to this, you said something about that it didn't feel fair, and there is actually, as far as I know, a mental model.
Yeah,
it's called fairness something.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is a mental model for everything.
Yeah, like, wait, there's in the middle: bribery, scarcity, trust. Damn, why I can't find anything today? It's insane, man.
But we can talk about this model. I'm gonna start. There's this model called basically unfairness, the feeling of unfairness, that people are essentially not okay when something is unfair. So they just gonna feel not okay when, like, for example, and this was tested, and I was part of this. I was part of this research. I was part of this research. It was studied as well in Maastricht, in the southern Netherlands. And during this research, what we did is we got to choose. So there are two people, they can't see the decision of another person, but they get to choose. They get to choose whether one person gets to choose how to divide the money between those two people. So they get certain amount of money, and the important part of this experiment is that everybody get the actual money after. So they actually get real money. It's not just an idea how much money you're gonna get after the research. So every subject that was tested received money after the experiment. So basically, what happened is people were essentially getting the real money right after the experiment. So what happened was that one person in front of a computer is picking how to divide the money between the two people. Another person is random. They don't know exactly who it's going to be. They can't communicate and agree to it first. They don't know what the experiment is going to be exactly about. So what happens is that this person says, all right, here is, so they get to choose. They get, let's say 20 euros. And from this 20 euros, what happens is they get to decide how they divide money. So most of the people would naturally decide, all right, so I get, let's say 19 and the other person gets €1, right? So then what happens after is the person that they can't see in another room on the computer gets the offer. And the offer is always the same. You can either agree and you get money in the way that the other person divided this, or you disagree and nobody gets any money whatsoever. So what happened in this experiment as a result is that when person gets to choose, and they get to choose 19 euros for me and €1 for another person, even though you would be getting €1, you reject the offer and nobody gets the money because they feel unfair that the other person is just getting 19 and I'm getting 1. Well, screw you, then nobody gets any money. And even similarly with closer sums to the middle. So obviously the more fair it is when it's 15, 14, 13 to let's say 7, obviously we would get the higher ratio of people accepting that, all right, I guess I can walk away from this experiment with, €8 and you get 12. But oftentimes those choices were rational, especially when the amount was more unfair. So very often when somebody would pick, all right, you get 6 and I get 14, people would click, I reject the offer, and nobody gets any money. So logically speaking, it would be better for you to get the stupid 6 for the time you've invested to come for this experiment than get nothing. But that's how, one example, that's one example of measuring it. So people basically tend to feel that something is unfair and they feel the unfairness. But I will welcome you, Konrad, to read the description of this mental model since you
I found it. But yeah, that was perfect. I think perfect example that basically shows that there's just something innate in us that kind of makes us keep track of if something's fair or not. Like we have like this compass or however you want to call it. But just reading it is so justice runs deep in our veins. In other illustration of our relative sense of well-being, we are careful arbiters of what is fair. Violations of fairness can be considered grounds for reciprocal action or at least distrust. Yet fairness itself seems to be a moving target. What is seen as fair and just in one time and place may not be in another. Consider that slavery has been seen as perfectly natural and perfectly unnatural in altering phases of human existence.
Wow, that's those examples are hardcore and also very well picturing it. And on this note, I would finish today's episode, and next week we can go through the next mental models. So we still have quite a few to go. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we're gonna see you next week. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.